A problem with language learning is that we usually do it in our home country where the language is not spoken. And so that means that we need to do a lot of extra effort to regularly speak the language, listen to the language, and so on. So the solution to that seems pretty simple. You just go and spend some time in a foreign country where that language is spoken. Easy, right? Now you're suddenly surrounded by the language, you hear it all the time. You'll certainly become fluent in no time. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. My name is Alex Senoner. I make videos about language learning, and I'm currently in Taipei, where I'm staying for several weeks to improve my Chinese. So let's see how useful being in the country really is. Before deciding to go and spend some time in a foreign country, it's important to look at what level we currently have in our target language. Because if we haven't started learning the language yet and we plan to go abroad and start learning it there, the benefits of being there may not be that big. Because at that point, we don't have any foundation in the language yet. And so even though we will hear the language the whole time, it'll all just be noise. It'll all just pass through us and won't stick because our brain doesn't have a structure yet to process what we're hearing. And building such a foundation, which can easily be done with a textbook, with a guided course, or with an app, that is something that we can do just as well in our home country. This is something which I noticed last summer when I traveled to in Indonesia. I had planned to study a little bit of Indonesia before going there, but then in the end, life happened and it just didn't work out and I didn't study anything. And when I stayed there for 2 weeks, I heard Indonesian every day for 2 weeks. But how much Indonesian do I know now? Nothing. I actually don't even remember how to say thank you. And that is big because I had not studied anything beforehand. And so it was all just noise that passed through me and it didn't stick. So I found also in the past when I stayed in other countries to learn languages that the most benefit, I always got it when I already had an intermediate level. Now, what level should that be? I'm not going to tell you it should be A2 or B1 or something like that. I would say you should be at a level where you can understand certain words, where the language is not complete noise. You hear something, you can make out certain words. You're like, oh yeah, this is a word that I have heard before. And the benefit of being abroad then is that it reinforces what you have already learned because you keep hearing it so much. And the language becomes much more natural to you instead of you having to build the language from scratch. So let's assume that you have an intermediate level and you decide to go and spend some time abroad. What is it like when you get there? Well, of course, as soon as you arrive there, you will notice the language is everywhere. You are surrounded by it all the time. You hear people speaking it, you hear the language in announcements, like for example on public transport.
南京复兴，转乘文。
You see the language written on road signs, and you finally get to use the language, for example, when you order food or you buy something in a shop.
内容对，我要这个正宗海南鸡腿饭。要小的还是中的？小的。
So you're finally immersed in the language. But here is the problem. You won't actually speak the language that much unless you seek it out. Because one assumption that people have is that by simply being in the foreign country, they'll automatically be speaking the language all the time. But that is not guaranteed, and you actually need to work hard to create an environment around yourself that allows you to actively use the language. Because when you arrive in a country like me here in Taipei, I don't have any friends here. I don't really know anyone here. So I'm not gonna have very long and deep conversations with random strangers on the streets. I mean, that could happen maybe in some countries based on on the culture. And I have actually talked to some people about where I come from, and they say, oh, your Chinese sounds really good, and so on. But it usually ends there. It doesn't go much further. So most of the talking that I'm doing is just ordering food at the restaurant, buying something in a shop. But the key here is that those are not conversations, because all you're saying is how much does it cost? Can I pay with card? Can I have a bag? And so on. So these are a set number of phrases which you keep using again and again, and that will make you very confident in using those phrases, and you will become confident in ordering something at the restaurant. But the key is to understand that those are not conversations, and you will remain inside a very limited amount of vocabulary in which you feel comfortable. So how do you manage to have more conversations? I will talk about that in a minute, but first I would like to address traveling alone versus with a friend. Some people may feel a little bit scared of or uncomfortable going to a foreign country for several weeks alone, and they may prefer going with a friend. That's something that I generally don't do, and I came here alone because the risk I see with going with a friend is that you're very likely going to speak your native language to your friend, assuming that you and your friend have that same language, unless you agreed beforehand that you and your friend want to speak in the target language the whole time. But that's quite difficult. I have tried that sometimes with some people, and that goes well for some time, and then you start feeling a bit exhausted, and it just doesn't feel very natural. So if you go with a friend, you obviously will spend a lot of time with that friend, because that's why you went there with the friend. You won't just abandon them. And that also means that you're spending less time listening to the country's language. So if you feel comfortable, I would always recommend going alone. So what can you do to make your stay in the foreign country as fruitful as possible and to speak the language a lot? Here is something that may seem surprising. The activities that you should do are actually not that different from what you would be doing back home anyway. You still need to do a lot of reading, a lot of listening. You probably still need to go to classrooms and so on. But the key difference is that by doing it in the foreign country, you are compounding the speed at which you are learning the language. And that is because you can build yourself a cycle of activities that interact with each other, and that so vastly increase the speed at which you are progressing in the language. So I've been doing that here too. I've built myself a cycle of 4 activities which I do, and the important thing is how these activities interact with each other. So what are they? The first one is classes. We obviously want to work on our language skills. We want to learn new words and new grammar. And a very good way to do that is to just sign up for a good old language class. Now, you may think, and I was thinking, but I already attended a language class back home. Why do I come to the foreign country and go to a classroom again? And yes, you're not gonna learn things in this classroom that you wouldn't learn back home. You're not going there to learn something that you otherwise wouldn't learn. There are 3 reasons why you're going to a classroom. The first is to just generally keep on learning the language, to learn new words, new grammar, and so on. The second is to meet other students, which, as I said, is meeting connections, to meet people with whom you can talk. You may meet other students with whom you become friends, and then with whom you can hang out also after the class. So it's a really great way to talk to other people. And what's even better is that you're doing it in a controlled environment, because in a classroom you're exposed to the language very slowly, and it's not the fast, incomprehensible chatter that you hear on the street. And the other students, because they're not native speakers, they also speak more slowly in a more comprehensible way. And if they don't speak English, because they may come from certain countries where that's not very common, then the only language that you have in common with them is actually the local language. And that is actually a really great way to practice it and to speak it in a very simple way and in a comprehensible way. And the third reason is that the learning doesn't end at the end of the classroom. If you attend a classroom in your home country, then after the class is finished, you go out and you're back in your world where you only hear your native language, and it's very difficult to continue practicing the language. You need to make extra effort. But here, after class, I may go to the restaurant and order something and talk to the waiter and use a word that I just learned in class, or I may look at the road sign and see a word that we just learned, or see some grammatical structure like that. So even after you finish the class, you are constantly reinforcing what you learned in class because you see it around yourself, and so you never stop learning. The next activity is to join a language café, and that is something that nowadays exists in most major cities. I think there are two here in Taipei. They are sometimes organized locally, or sometimes there are international organizations that plan them in various cities, like Mundolingo is one of them. And these are places where you go and you meet other people who want to practice speaking languages, and they are often also learning that language, and these are great places to meet people and therefore to have conversations with them, because like I said, the difficulty is having longer conversations with people. And at a language cafe, because you are both learning languages, you probably have a lot of things in common which you can talk about. You probably also both like traveling and so on. So these are topics that you can talk about, and this allows you to have longer conversations, to really listen a lot, to speak a lot, and because it's on this cycle, everything which you learned in the classroom, you can use it in the language cafe, and everything which you hear and learn in the language cafe, you can then use it again in the classroom. So that's why it's important that these activities interplay with each other. I've been going to a language cafe here in Taipei, and that has really been a very powerful source for me to also get confident in using the language with other people, precisely because I had rather long conversations, and because the topics were always topics where I felt comfortable in. The conversations could also go on for much longer. The third activity that I've been doing is to live with local people. I've actually been renting a room here in a flat with two local flatmates, and I've been speaking with them all the time only in Chinese. I asked them from the beginning if they would please speak with me only in Chinese, and they were very happy to. And this has actually been the biggest source of my progress here, because we talk almost every day, and I was also very lucky that I got along very well with them. We talk almost every evening about how our day was, and this is where I feel like I became the most natural at speaking, where I made the most progress in starting to speak without thinking too much about it, or where I learned to understand quickly what they're saying without having to analyze that so much. And this is something which I've generally noticed also since being here, that being abroad, you don't necessarily learn that many new words. And that's something that I also noticed in the past when I stayed in other countries. What happens is mostly that you reinforce what you already know. You definitely do learn some new words, but what happens mainly is that you learn to recognize much faster what you already know, and you stop thinking about the language, and it just becomes much faster, natural to you. So you kind of absorb the language much more. And the fourth activity that I've been working on is just consuming content, basically reading books, watching videos, and so on. And this is something that I had not really planned to do before I came here, because I thought, well, I'm here in the country, I'm not gonna sit at home watching videos when I can just go out in the city and use the language there. But the key here is, again, that reading a book or watching videos is, again, a controlled environment where you can consume the language at your own speed, and which is therefore a better place to learn new words. And the key here is, again, that this is one of the 4 activities that you do in this cycle. So the words that you learn from reading books, from watching videos, those are words that you then use when you talk to your flatmates. Those are expressions that you may then hear when you go to the classroom. And those are, again, words and expressions that you may use when you go to the language cafe. So each of these activities on their own is not that strong. What makes them strong is how these interact with each other. That really compounds the rate at which you're making progress. One more thing that I would like to mention is that don't expect to be like really motivated to learn the language every single day. You know, just like back home, you have some good days and some bad days. And what's more, now you're in a foreign country with a different environment, with a different culture, different food, maybe air quality. Maybe you live in an apartment which is very noisy or damp. And these things can really affect you a lot. And that actually happened to me at the beginning. So I think what's important is to not go and expect everything to be perfect, but to realize that this is just a normal country like your own, with normal people going about their lives, and I think if you approach it in that balanced way, it'll all work out well. So going to stay in a foreign country is not a magic bullet that makes you automatically immersed in the language, but it's about opportunity density. The language will become familiar to you faster, but deep progress depends on what kind of life you build around yourself. It doesn't happen on its own, and the evidence for that is that there are a lot of people around the world who have been living in a foreign country for 10 years or so and still don't speak the local language. So if you build this cycle of activities around yourself, the classes, the language cafe, the flatmates, and the books and films, your progress will truly compound and you will have made the best use of your stay abroad. If you struggle to find time to learn languages and going abroad is not really an option, check out my video on how I make more time for language learning in my daily life. Thank you so much for watching. It was a pleasure, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.